So in here I have my flour and my salt. It's I use a basic ratio of 3-2-1, 3 parts flour, 2 parts fat, 1 part liquid. My flour is, and that's all by weight. My flour is half unbleached all-purpose flour and half cake flour. So the amount of dough I'm going to make right now is going to be enough to make 1 double crusted pie and then a single crusted pie also. And the great thing about pie dough is it freezes really well. So I also make big pies. Like at work I make really big pies. So they're a little bit bigger than that. So that's the size of the pie that these would make.
Beautiful.
There's salt in here as well. I use a teaspoon and a half of salt for 1.5 pounds of flour. So I guess a teaspoon per pound of flour. So it's very cold. Everything's frozen too. I have my butter here already sliced and it's frozen as well.
Do you use salted or unsalted?
I use unsalted, but I like at home sometimes I use salted butter. I like salted butter. I like to use it in baking too. Going to start. Let me also mention that my fat is I use butter and lard. The lard really tenderizes the dough quite a bit. You can obviously use all butter and do the exact same technique. I'm going to add my lard later because lard and butter freeze very differently. Lard doesn't have any water in it at all, so it freezes really, really hard, but it melts really fast. The butter doesn't, it'll freeze really hard as well, but it doesn't melt as quickly. I'm going to break it up a little bit, and then I'm just going to toss it around.
I noticed you chilled your board.
Yeah, and normally I wouldn't do that necessarily unless the board was hot, but it's been sitting out here in the sun. So this is also a little bit. It's a little bit. I'm gonna have to lean forward here. So I'm just gonna start rolling my butter here. Until you add liquid, you don't develop any gluten at all. So it's not gonna. You're not working your flour here. Like you can handle it as much as you want until you add any liquid. It's not gonna overwork it at all. Just kind of rolling them into sheets.
I've never seen anyone do it that way.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
On the bottom.
Yeah.
It's the hell of the pastry cutters.
So, did you learn to do this somewhere, or you just decided?
I read this technique somewhere where I don't recall where I read it. It was like I was making a bunch of pies. I was doing pies at the farmers market, and I had been doing my dough at the same ratio, everything the same except for the lard. I wasn't using lard yet. I had been doing it just in a mixer, and a little old lady came by and she had bought a pie for me the week before, and she was like, "Your pie was delicious. That was a great pie, but your dough wasn't very flaky." And I was like, "Oh no, she didn't." But it was like, honestly, it changed my life. It changed my life. It made me start like looking for a different way to make dough, and I did. I that week I made like, I don't know, probably like 4 different pie doughs, and I was reading a lot. Then I was reading about like how ingredients affect each other, and like the scientific, I guess, aspect of it. And I think I read that the gluten doesn't start to develop until you add the liquid, and I was like, well, I guess then if you can do whatever you want to it until the liquid's there, and you're not gonna do any harm to it. So like I said, I'm just rolling these into flakes. You have to kind of scrape as you're going, so that because it's going to stick to the board. Toss it around a little bit. This is a lot smaller of a batch than I normally make, so it feels really weird to me.
I was going to ask, so what's the biggest scale that you think is reasonable?
That's reasonable is probably the one that I make at work right now, which is I go 4.5 pounds of flour, 3 pounds of fat, and 1.5 pounds of ice water, and that's 4.5 teaspoons of salt. I've made this I'm not even joking, I've made this in a 25-pound batch of dough before, and it doesn't make any sense. I was literally on top of the table rolling it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to break up you don't have to roll every single one of these into a sheet, but because you want everything to remain cold, but you want to get most of them. But at the same time, like, I'm just going to go through and kind of break it up like this, too. Scott, can you grab the lard? And the water. It's ice water in there.
Rachel, do you ever use just lard?
I have used just lard, and the reason I even started using lard at all was because I used to make tamales every year for Christmas, and one year I just had a ton of lard left over, and I had a friend whose mom used to put lard in her pie dough, and I had always heard of it, but I just never done it, and so I made a dough with all lard, and it was delicious. It's super flaky, but it tasted like pork, and I was like, you can't. I mean, how do you, how do you like make a
It'll be
sweet
great for a
pie?
savory pie.
Yeah, it was good, and but it also it has like it's just a little bit greasier too. And then so I just started messing with the ratio of lard and butter, and this dough still tastes like butter, which I like, but it has the tenderness from the lard. You know, shortening has the same effect as lard. I don't really like to use shortening. I've in fact never used shortening except for to fry things in, but it would do the same thing. So most of these are broken up now. There's still some bigger chunks, doesn't really matter. I have my lard here that's cut into cubes, and it's really hard. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chop it into here, kind of like the same effect as a pastry knife. This part could also be done in the beginning, really. In fact, that's what I do at work, is I take the lard and I put it with a little bit of the flour in like a food processor and just pulse it and put it back in the freezer till I need it. Then you would dump it on top, all of it on top right now. It's a little bit just more of a step that I didn't really have the electricity to do down here, but this is the same effect.
So what did you say the ratio was of butter to lard?
It's 3 parts butter, 1 part lard. So I have a total of a pound of fat, so it's 12 ounces of butter and 4 ounces of lard.
I love your mixing bowls.
Thank you. We got them at a vintage store. Scott had to have them. Alright, so you can see that like they're very uneven pieces. Some pieces are bigger, some pieces haven't even been chopped at all. In the finished product, the dough, it's totally fine if you have huge chunks of fat. It'll just make your dough more flaky. The lard is, like I said, it's a lot harder, so I'm just gonna do this. Now this is the tricky part. This is the part where you have to get a feel for it. So I'm going to make a hole in the middle of my dough here. I have ice water. It is like making pasta, right, this part. I have ice water, and I'm going to get a cup of the water, which is a half a pound of water.
So you do all measure it, you don't kind of do it by feel?
I always use the same amount of water. I know, we were just talking about that. Some people do it by feel, and
Yeah.
there is a part of this is definitely by feel, but it's when it's done, not how much water you use. And I know my grandma makes amazing pie dough. She makes different pie dough than I do, though. I think there's a million ways to make pie dough. This is just the way I do it. But I always measure the water. I always measure the flour. And it's always the same.
So you do it by weight? You set the water by weight?
Yeah, I mean a pint's a pound the world around, so it's it's a half a pound is 1 cup. So water's gonna try to escape, so you kind of gotta be. I start bringing the dough in, or the flour in from the outside here, just so that it will kind of absorb. And the water's gonna try to escape. There's gonna be places where the water wants to come out, so I just kind of chase it. Woo! That was a big one. Usually it doesn't go that bad.
So do you always do it on the counter and you
I
never
always
use
do it
a
on the
bowl?
No, I never use a bowl for this. Like I said, I used to do it with in a mixer, and I would just put everything in there and let it go, until it just kind of came together, and it kind of looked a little bit like this, maybe just more mixed up, and then I would stop. And in fact, you could stop right here. Like you could just use your hands and get everything moist, and you could stop right here. But what I'm about to show you is what makes this dough so flaky. So I have all my water in there and all my flour, and there are parts in here that are super saturated, and then there are parts where there's like it's still dry flour. So I'm going to pat it into a square. And get most of it off my hand. Hey Scott, would you grab me a little extra flour, please? And at this point too, I sometimes I sprinkle it with a little extra flour so it doesn't stick to my rolling pin. I'm going to go with it right now until he gets back. And I just start rolling. I feel
like you can almost do a workout video. Make pie.
When I used to do farmers markets, I did croissant dough, Danish dough, pie dough, all this stuff, and I had like pecs, like crazy pecs. So I'm just sprinkling with a little bit of extra flour just so it doesn't stick to the rolling pin. It's not like at the end of making this, I won't have even added an extra ounce of flour. It's just such a little amount. Okay, so I've rolled it out here to a very weird shape, and now I'm going to start folding it like you would a puff pastry dough or a croissant dough. And it doesn't, obviously, at this point, it's not even like a cohesive mass yet, so you're kind of just like picking it up and putting it on top. I do a long roll like that first, and then I kind of roll it towards me and up and pat it all around into a square. And it's, again, it is, parts of it are moist and parts of it are dry, but I can feel that it's dry enough that I don't need to sprinkle more flour here. I'm going to roll it again. And I can't tell you like you need to do 2 folds and 2 rolls because it's really a feeling. It's never less than 2 and rarely more than 3. So it's really just a feeling. I can tell by looking at it and feeling it right now that I'm going to need to do 1 more. It has to do with the temperature of everything. Like right now the lard is really melting. It's totally sticking to this. And everything else is still cold. This whole mass is still pretty cold right now. But yeah, it's gonna need another one. But it's becoming more cohesive as we go. This is like your extra hand. This is actually, it is.
How many
so this
pies
will
will
make,
this make?
This will make at least one that size and then another bottom crust. Like you could make like a crumb pie or like use something else or just freeze it, or you could double the recipe and make 3
make
pies.
tarts.
Yeah, or make tarts. So this is going to be the last roll. You can see though that like when I'm rolling it, it's coming up in big flakes like this. I'm gonna grease this thing up because there's so much fat on it sticking. I was just telling Liz and Leanne also that I've taught a lot of interns to make pie dough, and the thing that it takes a while. It takes a while to really learn to be able to feel when it's done. Like I'm looking at this right now and I know it's done because it's all pretty cohesive at this point.
It's all to be what?
Cohesive. It's like it's a mass. It's not like big. You know, there are some big chunks that are falling off, but you're gonna roll it again when you roll it out into the pie anyway, so you'll work them all in then. But the interns, I always ask them, you know, once it does click for them, I always say, what was it for you? What was it for you? How did you figure it out? And they always say the exact same thing. You really got to use your whole body. You're not just like, you can't just push it around. Like you got to get in there. You got to like, you know, feel it. You got to feel the dough and really, I don't know, get to know it, I guess. So this is the dough.